So, you want to build a branded Despia deck, but there's just so many options and so many cards to go through. How do we even decide? Well, hopefully in this video I can teach you exactly how to do that. But first, if you want to support me and the channel, use my affiliate links in the description below, and you can also become a YouTube member to get early access to deck lists, exclusive Discord access, and much more. This video is going to be the third installment in the Branded Academy series that, honestly, the second episode was a really long time ago, but this one I really wanted to do at this point in time because we finally have every single branded card currently in existence. We don't have any more plans to get more support for the deck, so now the deck is complete and still relatively at full power. So how do we build our decks? There are so many directions and tech options and ways that you can play branded, so I wanted to do two things with this video. One is to show you what are the minimum amount of cards you actually need to play the deck, in my opinion. What actually makes a branded deck and needs to be played in order to make it. This is going to be the main mandatory engine of the deck and extra deck, but furthermore, the other thing I want to show you is how you can fill the rest of the slots in the main, extra, and side deck with different tech options, different directions the deck can go in, and basically, from there, the sky's the limit. So let's dive into it and get to deck building. So hopefully this video can teach you a little bit about the process of deck building when it comes to branded Despia. Since there are just so many tech options and directions you can take the deck, but the deck also has a very large engine which we need to be concerned with when it comes to the mandatory cards we absolutely have to play in the deck, in my opinion, in order to succeed. So we're just going to dive into that, but before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe if you are new, if you want to support the channel even further, join as a member to get early access to deck lists, and let's begin with the cards that I see as mandatory to playing branded and how much you need to play of them. The first one is, of course, 3 Aluber. I think the main searcher of the deck, the best normal summon, one of the best cards in the deck. It is absolutely mandatory at 3 because your goal at the end of the day is to resolve Branded Fusion, and this card searches it. Then 2 Fallen of Albaz. This again is not a deck list. These are only the mandatory cards you need to play in the deck. 2 Albaz, in my opinion, is the minimum because you need 1 or 2 in order to resolve Branded Fusion, and obviously throughout the course of a game you want to resolve it more than once. We're going to talk about what else you can play, but 2, in my opinion, is just the minimum, not the recommended amount, but the minimum you need to play. Then 1 Quem and 1 Cartesia. In my opinion, this is the minimum amount. Again, not the recommended amount, but you need to be playing 1 of each in order to reach the deck's maximum potential, in my opinion. So you need to play 1 of each. Then for the additional monster tech cards, Mercurier, Tragedy, and Albion the Shrouded Dragon. These 3, you don't need them to resolve Branded Fusion, but they all have really strong effects that let you recur cards, negate cards, get stuff out of your graveyard or into your graveyard, and set up your field, your board, and your graveyard in order to win. These 3, in my opinion, are mandatory to achieve success with the deck. And then 2 other monsters, the Bestial Lubellion and Bestial Saronir. You don't need these to resolve Branded Fusion, but the advantage and the utility that these cards give you allows it to be mandatory, in my opinion, within the deck. Bestial Lubellion gets you to one of the more powerful cards in the deck, which is Branded Lost, and Bestial Saronir is, of course, searched by Lubellion. This is why you play only 1, so you can search it with Lubellion, so it's not dead, and you can get it to the graveyard, of course. But also Saronir is, of course, a way to banish cards that actually have value, but also get cards into the graveyard that synergize with other cards as well. This, in my opinion, is the minimum monster engine within the deck. This is what you need to run in order for the deck to be successful, but these are only the monsters. What about the spell cards? So it's no surprise that the best card in the deck is, of course, Branded Fusion, and you absolutely have to play it at 3. There is a very real chance that this card is going to be limited in the future, so for now, we need to get to it in every single which way possible, and of course, Branded Opening is another way to get to it because it gets you to Aluber, which in turn gets you to Branded Fusion. It also has a really good protection effect, but overall, this card is extremely busted, and it's at 3. So, you will play it at 3. And then 3 Fusion Deployment is actually the first non-lore card in this deck, But I think now with Cartesia, and we're going to talk about it when we talk about Grand Guignol, this card, in my opinion, is mandatory at 3 in order to achieve the maximum potential of the deck. Then, Branded in Red, which just gives you really, really good plays. This is probably one of the best setups that you can do in the deck is set up Branded in Red. And again, you don't need this to win, but you need this to play optimally. Again, same thing with Branded Lost. This card does nothing on its own. This card has no effect when you activate it. But combined with the rest of your deck and how easily you can actually get it to the field, this card can actually just break the game and win you the game right there on the spot when you activate it. And then Branded Retribution, which in my opinion is definitely mandatory. This card's utility is just so crazy, especially with Albion and Saronir, but also the field effect right now becomes a little bit more viable, so I think it's definitely mandatory. So that comes up to 24 cards in the main deck. 24 cards that you absolutely must play, which leaves you with 16 flex spots that you can fill in with the cards that I'm going to be talking about now. After that, we're going to talk about the extra deck and do a similar thing, and then of course get to the side deck, which is really, really important, and I know a lot of people are concerned with. So what can you fill up the 16 slots you have left in your non-engine slot in your branded deck? So there are of course a lot of options and a lot of considerations that come with them. In my opinion, you instantly go up to 26 cards with these two cards. Foolish Burial and Called by the Grave are exceptionally strong in branded because every hand in which you open Called by the Grave is basically automatically a win from there because you get to resolve the best card in your deck. Foolish Burial, on the other hand, sets up your graveyard, activates so many strong effects of cards, gets you Lubellion, gets you Saronir, gets you exactly what you need in order to achieve your combo, even ad libitum if you're playing that in your build. So I think this card is limited, it's exceptionally strong for that reason exactly, and I think you need to play it. But again, it's up to you, these are the flex spots. Another thing that you definitely should consider is the third Albaz. I'm personally always playing 3 for like a long time now, especially with Kastura still being around. Runic banishing cards like the Thread of Diablos is not gone because you still have Runic cards that banish things on top of your deck. I think the third Albaz is really important. And then we're going to be talking about the second Quem and, the second Cartesia. First of all, this is not Starlight. We need to take care of that. But I think the second Cartesia comes up a lot. I think it is one of the best cards in the deck. And definitely, again, with Kastura and Runic, you don't want your single copy to be banished because that means a lot of cards in your deck don't work anymore. Now, the second Quem, I recently started testing with another Quem, and I gotta say I really, really like it, especially because of the fact that when you run out of it on the first or second turn, when it goes to the graveyard, you don't really have a way to recycle it besides Branded in Red, grab it to the hand. But when you're running Grand Guignol, you can actually summon it from the deck because it's a Dogmatica monster. That gives you a huge advantage. This is why you should consider maybe a second Quem. Super Polymerization is a little bit format dependent. It's not always going to be good in certain formats or in certain matchups, but the card's effect is just removal that cannot be negated and doesn't trigger destruction effects or, other card effects of that nature. Super Polymerization is an extremely strong card, but it has some caveats because it doesn't work in every match, and it also requires you to add cards into your extra deck. Crossout Designator is another flex spot card that you can definitely use in this deck because it's really, really good at negating things like Ash Blossom and Joy Spring. It's no secret that Crossout Designator is one of my favorite cards. This card is absolutely busted in my opinion. There is also a good reason why it's at 1 in the OCG because it's just so damn strong it can negate every card in the game. But again, there are caveats here because you need to play targets for it and sometimes it's just going to be dead in your hand. Another kind of copium card is Neospatian Aquadolphin, which allows you with fusion deployment and the fusion that I don't remember the name of it, you can actually summon this to the field, discard a card, then look at your opponent's hand and get rid of an Ash Blossom. This is another way you can replace Crossout Designator without playing more targets in your deck. Now, the next thing is Gimmick Puppet Nightmare and cards similar to it. We're going to talk about it in the side deck also. This is definitely up to your preference. I think this card is very consistent, still very strong. If you're going to a big tournament, you might want to consider playing Gimmick Puppet Nightmare just because it's an essential piece of the deck. It's not mandatory, but it's something that you should consider if you want to win tournaments. The Edge and Chain package is something that we haven't seen in a while, but again, polymerization, Fight for Patchwork, and Edge and Chain, all really, really good and strong cards that are viable for your flex spot. Again, this kind of ties into what format is actually being played. If Droll is heavy, for example, that might not be the best decision, but consider that it's also at least 6 card out of your flex spot engine, so consider that when you're adding those into the deck because this is a big amount of cards. Then we're going to talk about Allure of Darkness, which is a very strong card. It triggers your effects, it draws 2 cards, it's not once per turn. However, you need to remember that you need to use this card in your advantage and not just use it in banishing the important 24 cards that you have here, or even less the dark monsters that you have, which are all really essential. You need to be upping the numbers of your good dark monsters like Mercurier and Tragedy that actually get you value, and then you can just go plus on your opponent and even plus in addition to that. Then Gold Sarcophagus is actually, should be with these 2 right here, but I think Gold Sarcophagus in a lot of times is not actually correct to play if you're not playing enough cards that trigger similar to Tragedy and Mercurier. I like to play this with more than 1 Tragedy and Mercurier, especially Mercurier specifically, because if you draw this with Mercurier, this is a dead brick in your hand. You can get other stuff, but of course it's not going to give you immediate value. Then Branded in White is a card that is really strong. It's a poly, but also, sort of like a Miracle Fusion. And this card is very good, but it needs to be run with other Bestials or maybe a higher dragon count within your deck. I really, really love this card, but again, not every time it's actually going to be even live in your hand. And then Nadir Servant is something that a lot of people have been considering instead of Crossout Designator. I think this card is exceptionally cool. You can use stuff from your graveyard to go plus on your opponent. And of course, this really, really does come up. If you don't get to resolve Ash, you can play a little bit extra on your turn and then on your opponent's turn. But if you do resolve Branded Fusion and this, it's just infinite advantage. So you have a lot of options here, and that's not all. There are a lot of other options, including but not limited to board breakers and hand traps, which are of course exceptionally strong. Some combination of this will definitely work well, again, depending on the meta, the matchups, the build of your deck, and other things that you actually are expecting to see in a tournament. Then you can go ahead, choose and mix and match and fill up the rest of your slots in your 24 engine slots, 16 non-engine slots deck. It's time to talk about the extra deck, and the extra deck is the most powerful, part of the deck in Branded and in a lot of decks otherwise, but it's actually a lot more lenient in terms of what you actually need to play. In my opinion, the mandatory cards that you need to play are 2 Albion the Branded Dragon, one of the best cards in the deck, such an incredibly powerful card with a really good graveyard effect and of course a really good fusion effect. 2 Mirror Jade, this card is the best card in your deck by no stretch of the imagination. Then Lubellion and Grand Guignol. I think these 6 cards are actually the minimum. You need this in order to gain so much value from your Cartesia. This card is really, really exceptional. Lubellion helps you play through certain lines and also chain block if there's a negate on the field. And then these 2 are actually the only 2 ofs most of the time that you play in your extra deck. This is the minimum, and you have so much utility beyond that. 2 cards that I want to start with are actually Lulu Wallolith and Titaniclad. These 2 are probably the best cards that you can play with cards like Nadir Servant. This card and this card have solid on-field effect that they can actually get. Both of them can get to really high attack stats, but their graveyard effects allow you to get to Quem, and Lulu specifically allows you to get to Cartesia. These are very, very good when it comes to Nadir Servant, maybe a little bit less so in other builds, but again, very, very strong cards for utility. Warlord Furious Dragon is a card that has been seeing a little bit more play. I think it's exceptionally good in a format where you need to destroy things, floodgates or runic cards, continuous spells, stuff like that, but also good in a build in which you're going for sort of a late game strategy where you already have a lot of darks in play, so you can banish them to summon Borreload Furious Dragon. Also, again, in a higher bestial count deck, this is going to be exceptionally strong. Then the second Grand Guignol, I think, might come up and might go into play really, really soon because it's just such an insanely powerful card. And if you combine it with a second Quem, the Guiding Virtuous, the next card is the second copy of Grand Guignol. I think this is definitely an option you need to consider because this card just offers so much value. Sends one of the best cards in your deck to the graveyard, whichever one you choose. There's so many cards this card can send to the graveyard that get so much value. This card is honestly almost bannable. Also getting so much value from your Cartesia and getting to Quem more than once per game, which is really, really strong. Then we have Proskinian that kind of goes into it. Kind of not seeing play recently, but again, a very, very strong card. This card can take any boss monster from the extra deck from your opponent's graveyard and also inflict a ton of damage when it destroys a card by battle. Albalenidus sort of seeing more play in Master Duel right now, but again, a very strong card. It can attack a lot of times, and also this card can actually steal your opponent's field because you can contact fuse with this card, which is really, really good. Guardian Chimera, I think, is a very, very strong utility and almost mandatory. I kind of considered putting it in the mandatory slot. This card, there's no way you're playing Branded without it. It's such an unbelievably strong card, and it does things that your deck doesn't usually do, which is destroy cards, which is very, very strong. Sanctifier, at this point, I would say is almost mandatory. You don't need it to run the deck successfully, but this card's effect, besides any kind of lock, is really, really incredible. Then we have Dragoon, which is very dependent on your build. This card is very, very strong, but it's not going to be good in every format. This card kind of showed up again when you're talking about Runic and things like Kashtira that have problem targeting, but, you know, it's not going to be always good, and you're not always going to want to play the brick in it for the deck and, you know, pay the very high cost of discarding cards for this card because Branded kind of struggles with hand advantage as it is. Then Dragos Tapelia. It's not mandatory. Some people are actually cutting this card, but regardless of Super Poly, this card is one of the best things that you can do. If you are under Shifter, for example, and you don't have Dragoon, this is probably the best thing that you can put on your field. Then Quiritus, I think such an amazing card. I won't be not playing it anytime soon. It has a really good graveyard effect that people just aren't aware of, and of course, against non-fusion deck, this card can actually stay on the board and just threaten the board so much, just with its both effects just so strong. Then Rindbrum, I think it's almost mandatory at this point. You need to fusion someone from the graveyard. I think Rindbrum is really, really good. Then the Super Poly targets, if you are playing Super Poly at that, I think these cards are really, really good. Garura might actually come up even if you're not playing Super Poly just to send off of Grand Guignol. But also, again, if you're playing Super Poly, you're going to need to find slots for these cards. And then lastly, we're talking about Sprint, the Iron Dash Dragon, which in my opinion, even if you're not running Kit, right? Even if you're not running Kit, this card can make every card a Super Poly target with Albaz just for its fusion effect if it's summoned this turn. I think there are a lot of more options in the extra deck than this, but these are the ones that have been popping up recently and are more popular than others. And you know, you can mix and match between them depending on your strategy. And again, the next video is going to be showing you how to actually achieve your goals with the deck. And before I forget, one card that I completely forgot about is Masquerade the Blazing Dragon, because it's kind of been losing popularity in people's main deck, extra deck, which is meaning to not put this card in the side because I played it in my nationals in the side deck. I think the main problem with Masquerade is that it takes up a very important extra deck spot in, you know, this card does a very specific thing. It doesn't gain you a lot of advantage on the field, so you need this card for specific purposes. Nesh said it really well a few weeks ago in one of his videos that Branded either wins fast or loses fast, and I completely agree with this. And, you know, Masquerade at this point could be completely cuttable from your deck. Now for the last portion of the deck, we're going to talk about the side deck a little bit, and this is not going to be building you a side deck because it really differs from format to format, but some options of cards that I think the Branded extra deck absolutely needs because it's lacking in certain parts of gameplay. The first one is going to be strong going second cards. Specifically, there can be only one type of cards. this card could be ran really well in branded because your end board is consistent of a lot of types most of the time. There can be only one is a very good going first option. Your deck should be ready to go first at any point, so you don't want a lot of your side deck to be dedicated to going first. But another thing that is sort of going first is tech cards that could be used with Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. For example, Invader of Darkness and Jinzo. Albion is an extremely powerful card, and sometimes you have cards like these that can shut off entire mechanics in the game. And this is why you should definitely consider to play them in combination with Albion to get that going first advantage. But then we also need to break boards, and I think Evenly Matched and Dark Ruler No More probably are the best at doing the job when it comes to branded. I think Evenly Matched and Dark Ruler No More has a very distinct disadvantage when it comes to branded, which is not dealing damage to your opponent by battle in the turn in which you activate them. And in branded, that could usually mean not OTKing your opponent because the branded bodies are so goddamn powerful and strong that you're giving up a possible OTK in order to break a board. Sometimes that is definitely what you have to do, but I think a really strong board breaking ability that shuts down an entire board is mandatory in this deck. The next card is Kaijus. I think this deck doesn't deal exceptionally well with unaffected cards and it needs help from outside. Also, things like a Rise Art, even if they're not unaffected, could be just good spot removal against those decks that have a really strong boss monster that you need to take care of. Then, power hand traps like Drolin Lockbird and Dimension Shifter, also Nibiru could be in the same category, just for, those combo decks that you really have to stop in order to play your game. Then, one thing that is really important in this deck, I think, is back row removal, and you need to be dedicating at least 3 spots, I believe, in your deck for specifically my recommendation would be Cosmic Cyclone, or maybe 2 Cyclone and 2 Lightning Storm, maybe a Duster at that point as well. One of the things that Branded struggles with a lot is actually back row, especially Floodgates, Anti-Spell Fragrance, and of course the Grave of the Super Ancient Organisms. You can take out things like the Runic Fountain, which really helps you play, and overall you have to play some sort of back row removal. You can't just wing it. I don't personally believe in that. And the last thing I want to talk about is Bestials. Synergistic to the deck, searches you for starters from your deck, and of course wins you the mirror and other matchups, including dragons, which are also gaining a lot of popularity right now. And I think this is my recipe for a good side deck when it comes to branded. Good going first text, good board breaking abilities, powerful kaijus and hand traps, back row removal, and additional bestial utility, usually probably 2 Magnamut at that. I think this is a very good composition of a side deck, and now you're ready to assemble your deck. In the next episode of the Branded Academy, I'm going to be showing you how to actually physically put the deck together in order to achieve your goals. We're going to be discussing what the goal of the deck should be, how it can achieve it, which cards it should use, and how should you side deck for specific matchups in a specific meta. It's going to be super interesting and in-depth. Let me know in the comments if this was helpful for you. What else would you like to see in the Branded Academy? And of course, leave a thumbs up on the video and subscribe. Thank you for joining another session of the Branded Academy. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.